A bright Colorado afternoon had buried the roadside in white when Sergeant Corbin Hale heard one exhausted bark below the snowbank. At the bottom of the ditch, a German shepherd stood over an injured female, refusing to leave even as the cold closed in. Corbin got them to safety, but the male dog, Cinder, kept watching every door as if someone important was still missing. Weeks later, Cinder began stopping at patches of strangely warm ground beside the town's community garden. Corbin listened this time, and beneath the frozen soil came 3 deliberate knocks from 2 workers, trapped where no one could see them. To bring them home, Corbin would have to face the hardest lesson of his own past. Courage does not always mean being the one who goes in. If an animal has ever given you a story worth remembering, share it with us, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Winter had a way of making danger look clean. By mid-afternoon, County Route 14 had been plowed into 2 dark ribbons cutting through miles of white. The storm that had buried Silver Creek overnight had moved east, leaving behind a hard blue sky and sunlight so bright it turned every snowbank into glass. Sergeant Corbin Hale drove with one hand, resting low on the wheel. The heater pushed warm air against his boots. His radio murmured occasional traffic from dispatch, mostly reports of stalled vehicles, downed branches, and residents asking when the county plows would reach the smaller roads. Nothing urgent. That was the problem with afternoons like this. People saw the sun and assumed the storm was over. Corbin knew better. At 40, he had spent enough winters in Colorado patrol cars to know that weather did not need to be dramatic to hurt someone. Ice hid beneath packed snow. Exhaust collected around buried tailpipes. Drivers relaxed too early. He scanned the shoulders almost automatically. Mailbox. Snowbank. Driveway. Fence. Ditch. A sound slipped beneath the hum of the tires. Corbin's eyes shifted toward the passenger window. Nothing. He drove another 30 yards. The sound came again. A bark. Short. Hoarse. Not the deep territorial warning of a farm dog reacting to a passing cruiser. This one seemed to break apart before it fully left the animal's throat. Corbin eased off the accelerator. He checked the mirror, moved onto the shoulder, and stopped. For a moment he remained behind the wheel. Wind blew loose snow across the road in pale ribbons. Then the bark came a third time. Corbin reached for the radio. 214, checking the east ditch near mile marker 27. Possible animal in distress. Dispatch acknowledged him. He stepped out. Cold met him immediately, sharp enough to make the skin along his cheeks tighten. He zipped his dark navy patrol jacket higher, pulled black gloves from his pocket, then opened the rear compartment of the cruiser. Flashlight, emergency blanket, heavy wool blanket, basic first aid kit. He carried the gear toward the edge of the road. The ditch dropped farther than it had looked from inside the car. Snow had drifted deep against the lower brush. Corbin descended carefully, boots sinking almost to mid-calf. Halfway down, something dark moved. Corbin stopped. A German shepherd stood 20 feet away. Male. Large. Black and tan coat crusted with snow. One ear carried a small notch near the tip, and the dog's ribs were not exposed, but the waist was too narrow for a healthy shepherd of that size. The animal planted himself sideways across the bottom of the ditch. Then he growled. Corbin did not reach toward his duty belt. He lowered the flashlight. All right. The shepherd's amber-brown eyes followed Corbin's hands. There was no wildness in the stare. Fear, yes. Exhaustion. Something harder beneath both. But the dog was not looking at Corbin the way an animal prepared to attack usually looked at a threat. Every few seconds, the shepherd glanced behind him. Corbin followed the movement. That was when he saw the second dog. A female German shepherd lay partly buried in a drift near the brush line. Her coat was lighter pale golden cream beneath the wet snow, and one rear leg rested at an unnatural angle against the slope. Her chest moved. Barely. Corbin felt his breathing change. The male shepherd growled again. I see her, Corbin said. The dog held his ground. Corbin lowered himself slowly until one knee touched the snow. His black watch disappeared beneath the cuff of his glove as he placed both hands where the shepherd could see them. The dog's lips pulled back. Corbin stayed still. The female's breath rose in a faint mist, then stopped. 1 second. Tfo. Her ribs moved again. The male shepherd turned sharply. He crossed the small space between them and touched his nose to her muzzle. When she did not respond, he licked the side of her face. Once. Again. Then he pushed his nose beneath her jaw. Nothing. The dog looked back at Corbin. He barked. That sound reached somewhere the cold had never managed to numb. For a fraction of a second, Corbin did not see the ditch. He saw flashing amber lights reflected across frozen pavement. A patrol cruiser, crushed near a tanker. A radio clenched too tightly in his hand. Dean Foster's voice coming through static. "Still here, Hale." Not screaming. That was the part Corbin remembered most clearly. Dean had sounded almost embarrassed to need help. Corbin had been close enough to see the car, close enough to run. And the incident commander had ordered everyone back because fuel was leaking beneath the tanker. Wait for hazmat. Hold the perimeter. Do not approach. Corbin had obeyed. 6 years later, his mind still treated obedience like evidence. The shepherd barked again. Corbin blinked. White ditch. Blue sky. 2 dogs. One still breathing. His thumb had found the edge of his watch beneath his glove. He released it. "This one's still here," he said. The male shepherd stared at him. Corbin shifted one boot forward through the snow. The growl returned. He stopped. "I need to check her." No response. Of course there wasn't. Corbin exhaled through his nose. "Not big on negotiation, huh?" The shepherd's eyes stayed fixed on him. Corbin moved another few inches. This time, the dog did not advance. That was enough. Corbin reached the female slowly, staying angled rather than facing the male straight on. He kept the blanket between himself and the dog until he could lower it beside her. He touched 2 gloved fingers against the inside of her rear leg, searching. There. Weak. Fast. Her coat was freezing against his hands. He checked her breathing and gently felt along the visible parts of her body, stopping when her muscles tightened around the hip. The female gave a faint sound. The male shepherd moved instantly. His shoulder struck Corbin's upper arm. Not a bite. Not quite a shove. A warning delivered with 80 pounds of fear. Corbin froze. The dog's muzzle was inches from his face. Snow clung to the black fur around his nose. Corbin could hear him breathing. "I know." The shepherd gave a low growl. Corbin looked down at the female. "She hurts." The growl deepened. "Yeah." He looked back at the male. "But if she stays here, she dies." The words came out rougher than he intended. The shepherd did not understand the sentence. Corbin knew that. But animals understood tone, posture, hesitation. They understood when hands came with anger and when they came with purpose. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then the male took one step backward. Corbin waited. Another half step. Permission was too generous a word. But it was something. Good. Corbin unfolded the emergency blanket and eased it around the female's body. He avoided unnecessary movement of her hindquarters, then worked the heavier wool blanket beneath her a few inches at a time. The male shepherd watched everything. When the female whimpered, he leaned forward but did not interfere. Corbin slid one arm beneath her chest and the other beneath her body, keeping her as level as he could. "All right, girl." She weighed less than she should have. That bothered him almost as much as the cold. He lifted. The female's head sagged against his arm. The male moved beside him immediately. Corbin took one careful step uphill. The shepherd matched it. Another step. The dog stayed so close that wet fur brushed Corbin's patrol pants. "Don't trip me," Corbin muttered. The shepherd ignored him. Climbing the ditch with a 70-pound injured dog was slow work. Twice Corbin had to plant one knee into the snow to keep from slipping. Each time the male stopped too. He never tried to run ahead. Never left the female. By the time they reached the road, Corbin's breathing had turned heavy and the back of his jacket felt damp despite the cold. He opened the rear passenger door. Before he could say anything, the male shepherd jumped inside. Corbin almost objected. Then the dog turned, making room. "Fine, your car now." Corbin laid the female across the rear seat on the blankets. The male immediately lowered himself beside her. He pressed his chest against her side and touched his muzzle near her ear. Corbin closed the door gently. Once behind the wheel, he called dispatch. 214. "I've got 2 German shepherds. Female is hypothermic, possible pelvic or hindquarter injury. Male is protective but manageable. I'm transporting both to Silver Creek Veterinary. Copy. Want animal control to meet you? Corbin looked into the rearview mirror. The male had not taken his eyes off the female. Not yet. Call the clinic and tell them I'm coming. Copy that. Corbin pulled onto Route 14. He drove faster than before, but not recklessly. The road demanded attention. So did the mirror. Every time the cruiser leaned through a curve, the male shepherd adjusted his body to stay against the female. Once she stirred. A faint whine escaped her. The male's head came up immediately. He nudged the edge of the blanket away from her muzzle, touched his nose to her ear, then held perfectly still. Corbin tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He knew that posture, not from dogs, from people. Someone beside a hospital bed. Someone beside a wreck. Someone listening to a radio and pretending that staying close could somehow become enough. The road ahead opened toward the valley. Silver Creek appeared between the pines, roofs bright beneath the late afternoon sun. The male shepherd lifted his head when the first buildings came into view, then lowered it again beside the female. Corbin watched him for another second. "Stay with her," he said quietly. The words entered the warm interior of the cruiser and remained there. No static answered, no voice faded away before he could reach it. Only the faint sound of the female dog's breathing and the steady presence of the animal beside her. Corbin turned toward the lights of town. For once, the distance in front of him was getting shorter. Dr. Mallory Reese opened the clinic door before Corbin reached it. She had apparently been watching for the cruiser. "Treatment room," she said, already stepping aside. Corbin carried the female shepherd through the entrance, while the male stayed so close to his right leg that their shoulders nearly collided in the doorway. Warm air, antiseptic, wet fur, rubber flooring. The change from the open winter road to the bright clinic made everything suddenly more specific. Outside, the female had looked like part of the storm, under fluorescent light. She was simply an exhausted animal with ice packed into the fur along her belly and legs. Mallory Reese was 45, lean, sharp-eyed, and moving with the economical speed of someone who had long ago learned that urgency and panic were not the same thing. Auburn hair had been pulled into a low knot, though several strands had escaped around her face. Dark teal scrubs showed beneath a light clinic coat. "Set her here." Corbin lowered the shepherd onto the padded table. The male immediately rose on his hind legs and put both front paws against the metal edge. A growl filled the room. Mallory stopped reaching for the female. "Your friend?" "Met him about 20 minutes ago." "Wonderful." The dog glanced between them. Mallory studied him for a moment. "He's scared, Sergeant. Scared dogs still have teeth." "I know." "Good. Keep knowing it." A veterinary technician entered from the back, carrying towels and a warming blanket. The male shepherd stiffened. Corbin shifted slightly between him and the table, not blocking his view, just giving him one person to watch instead of three. Easi. The dog's breathing remained fast, but he dropped back to all fours. Mallory began with the basics. Temperature dangerously low. Dehydration. Weak but steady pulse. Pain centered around the pelvis and right hindquarter. No obvious major external injury. The technician brought warmed fluids while Mallory worked. The male shepherd watched every hand. Whenever the female made the smallest sound, his body tightened. Corbin had seen protective aggression before. Patrol dogs, frightened pets at accident scenes, animals defending yards, vehicles, people. This was different. There was no territory here. Nothing belonged to the male except the animal on the table. That seemed to be enough. Mallory pressed gently along the female's abdomen, then stopped when the dog flinched. "Likely vehicle contact," she said. "Could have been clipped rather than hit squarely. She may have gotten off the road afterward." "How long outside?" Mallory glanced at the condition of the coat and paws. "Long enough." It was not an answer designed to comfort him. Corbin appreciated that. The male shepherd pressed his nose against Corbin's gloved hand, then looked back at the table. He was not asking Corbin for affection. He was checking him, making sure he remained where he had been assigned. Corbin almost smiled. "Yeah, I'm still here." Mallory heard him. "You planning to keep negotiating with him all night?" "I'm beginning to think he's management." "That would explain the attitude." The technician hid a smile. Once the female's temperature began to rise, Mallory reached for a handheld microchip scanner. The male growled at the unfamiliar movement. Corbin crouched beside him. "It's fine." Mallory passed the scanner over the female's shoulders and neck. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Then she checked the male. "No signal. No chips," she said. "Collars?" Neither had one. Mallory examined the male more closely now that he had settled enough to allow it. His coat was dirty, but not neglected in the way Corbin expected from a dog that had lived outside for months. His nails showed uneven wear. The pads were rough. His body carried less weight than it should have, though he remained strong. She checked the female's paws next. "These two haven't been on their own since yesterday." "How long?" "Hard to say. Couple weeks. Maybe more. They've been moving." Corbin looked at the male. The dog looked back. For the first time, Corbin wondered where the journey had started. Not because he expected an answer, because suddenly it bothered him that there wasn't one. Mallory picked up the phone. "I'm calling Miles." "Who's Miles?" "The man who makes abandoned animal paperwork feel like a federal investigation." "That sounds healthy." "He enjoys it." 20 minutes later, Miles Danner came through the front door carrying a tablet under one arm and wearing an olive canvas jacket that looked permanently dusted with dog hair. He was 51, sturdy through the middle, sandy gray hair flattened by a knit cap, with the weathered expression of a man who had spent years listening to people explain why an animal somehow became somebody else's responsibility. A ring of shelter keys clicked softly at his belt. He stopped when he saw the male shepherd beside Corbin. "Well," Corbin waited. Miles nodded toward the dog. "That's a serious face. He's had a serious day." Miles crouched several feet away without reaching forward. The dog watched him. "Mal? Intact?" Mallory answered while continuing to work. "Yes. No chip. Female same." Miles opened the tablet. "Any color marks?" "Some. Nothing recent enough to identify." Miles began making calls. County shelter. Neighboring jurisdictions. Lost dog reports. Sheriff dispatches. Rescue groups. He uploaded photographs to the county stray system and checked reports from the previous several weeks. No immediate match. "Doesn't mean nobody's looking," he said. "People lose animals in one county and call another. Sometimes they post online and assume the universe handles the rest." Corbin looked toward the female. "So what happens if nobody claims them?" Miles barely glanced up. "First, we do the part before that." Corbin understood the correction. Procedure before conclusion. Normally that would have reassured him. Instead, he found himself staring at the two dogs as if paperwork had suddenly become a threat. Mallory asked the technician to prepare the female for radiographs. The male immediately stood. "He can't come into imaging," Mallory said. Corbin looked down at him. The shepherd's ears were forward. "Ready." "No," Corbin said quietly. The dog looked toward the treatment room door. "You stay." The dog did not. He followed the technician 2 steps. Corbin caught the temporary slip lead before he could reach the doorway. The shepherd turned sharply. For 1 tense second, Corbin expected another growl. Instead, the dog simply planted his feet. Refusal without drama. Mallory sighed. "He needs something to call him." Corbin frowned. "Why?" "Because, hey, emotionally complicated German shepherd is inefficient." Miles looked up from the tablet. "Accurate, though." Corbin studied the dog. Under the clinic lights, the black fur across his back had begun to dry. Brown warmth showed beneath it, dark and muted, like something left after a fire had burned down. The name arrived without much ceremony. "Cinder." The shepherd's ears shifted. Mallory gave him a look. "That was fast." "It's a name." "Those are usually the things I ask for when I ask for a name." Corbin ignored her. Mallory glanced toward the female being prepared beyond the doorway. "And her?" Corbin could see only part of her from where he stood. The mud had been cleaned away from her neck and chest. Beneath it, her coat was much lighter than he had realized on the road, pale honey and cream under the darker saddle. The room seemed brighter around her. "Luma." Miles typed both names into the temporary record. Corbin heard the keys. Something about that bothered him. Names made them easier to talk about. They also made it harder to pretend they were merely 2 animals he had found beside a county road. Cinder sat down. Not relaxed. Waiting. The radiographs took time. When Mallory returned, she pulled the images onto a monitor and pointed with one finger. "The good news is, I don't see anything here that says we're out of options." Corbin looked at the pale shapes on the screen. "And the bad? Pelvic injury, soft tissue trauma. She needs better imaging and orthopedic support than I can give her here. Probably surgery, possibly not. A specialist needs to make that call." "Where?" "Denver." Corbin glanced toward Cinder. The dog was watching Luma through the open treatment room door. Mallory caught the look. "He can't ride with her." Corbin turned back. "Why not?" "The transport vehicle is small. Luma needs to stay stable, and he's still trying to supervise every person who touches her." As if summoned by criticism, Cinder stood. Mallory folded her arm. "He has done an impressive job keeping her alive. Now he needs to stop doing the whole job." Corbin said nothing. The sentence landed somewhere uncomfortable. A referral hospital in Denver accepted Luma. By early evening, a veterinary transport vehicle arrived. The light outside had faded to blue. Inside the clinic, the staff transferred Luma onto a padded transport stretcher. Cinder understood immediately. He had tolerated examination. Needles, blankets, doors, strangers. This was different. They were taking her away. He surged forward. Corbin caught him around the chest before the leash snapped tight. "Cinder." The dog fought for another step, not at Corbin, toward Luma. "Cinder." The name was new, but the tone was not. The dog twisted his head. "Look at me." For a second, he refused. Then amber-brown eyes met blue-gray ones. Corbin felt the animal trembling against his arms. "She's going because she needs more help." Cinder strained once toward the doorway. Corbin held just enough to keep him from reaching the stretcher. "You got her here." The dog's breathing came hard. Corbin heard himself say the next words before he had decided to say them. "You didn't fail her." Everything inside him went quiet. Not the clinic. He could still hear the transport crew, the wheels of the stretcher, a cabinet closing, Miles speaking softly to the technician. But the sentence remained between Corbin and the dog. "You didn't fail her." He had heard versions of it before, from supervisors, from investigators, from people who had read reports about Dean Foster and concluded Corbin had followed the correct order. Mallory was looking at him, not with pity. That would have been easier to reject. She simply looked at him as though she had noticed a door he preferred to keep closed. Corbin released his breath. Cinder stopped pulling. The stretcher passed through the side entrance. Luma lifted her head slightly. Cinder made a low sound. Then the door closed. The transport vehicle pulled away. Cinder walked to the door. He put his nose near the bottom seam, waited. Nobody called him back. Eventually he turned. Corbin was still there. Cinder crossed the room and leaned his shoulder against Corbin's leg. No warning. No request. Just wait. Miles cleared his throat. "So," Corbin looked at him. "The shelter's full tonight." "No, I haven't asked yet. I'm saving us time." Miles tapped something on his tablet. "Emergency Foster. Few days. Maybe less." "No." Cinder remained against Corbin's leg. Miles looked down at the dog. Then back up. "He appears to have filed an appeal." Mallory turned away, but Corbin saw the beginning of a smile. Corbin stared at Cinder. The dog looked exhausted now. Not fierce. Not commanding. Just tired. His entire purpose for however many weeks he had been on the road had disappeared through a clinic door. Corbin knew enough about empty houses to understand what came next. He rubbed one hand over his face. One night, Miles did not smile. He simply entered the information. Emergency Foster placement. Sergeant Corbin Hale. Cinder stayed where he was. And Corbin, despite every intention he had brought into the clinic, did not move away. Cinder entered Corbin Hale's house as if he expected someone to explain the mistake. He stopped just inside the mudroom and looked back at the open door. Corbin stood behind him holding a paper bag of dog food Miles Danner had practically forced into his hands, along with a green nylon collar, 2 stainless steel bowls, and enough paperwork to make the arrangement feel much more permanent than the words Emergency Foster suggested. "You can go in." Cinder looked at him. Corbin pointed toward the kitchen. "That's generally how houses work." "Nothing." Corbin closed the door. Cinder immediately turned toward it. The house sat on the quieter western edge of Silver Creek, where older timber homes gave way to pine-covered slopes and long stretches of snow. Corbin had bought the place 7 years earlier because it required very little explanation. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, wood stove, detached garage. No neighbors close enough to mistake politeness for friendship. He had never thought of it as lonely. Loneliness implied that something was missing. Corbin had preferred to call it quiet. Cinder spent the first evening testing that distinction. He inspected the kitchen, the hallway, the living room, and the short passage toward Corbin's bedroom. Then he returned to the front door. Corbin filled a bowl with water. Cinder ignored it. He poured kibble into another. The dog smelled it and walked away. "You know, that cost $12 more than the food Miles originally handed me." Cinder lay down with his chest facing the door. "So I'm glad somebody appreciates quality." No response. Corbin found 2 old blankets and folded them beside the wood stove. The bricks surrounding the stove held enough warmth that even Corbin occasionally stood there after coming in from patrol. He pointed. "There." Cinder looked at the blankets, then at the door, then lowered his head onto his paws. Corbin stared at him. "Fine. Freeze 6 feet closer to the door. Excellent strategy." The dog closed his eyes. Corbin discovered quickly that Cinder was not difficult in any ordinary sense. That almost made things worse. He did not chew furniture. He did not knock over trash. He did not bark through the night. He did not test doors or scratch at windows. He simply waited. Every engine on the road brought his head up. Every pair of headlights passing through the trees made him stand. When Corbin came home from an early patrol the next morning, Cinder hurried past him toward the cruiser and sniffed along the rear passenger door where Luma had lain. Then he stood there. Corbin opened the door for him. Cinder climbed halfway inside and smelled the blankets. After a minute, he backed out. "No," Corbin said quietly. "She's not there." Cinder looked past him toward the road. Corbin did not try to explain further. He had never had much respect for people who talked too much around animals simply because animals could not interrupt. Dr. Mallory Reese called that afternoon. Denver says she made it through the night. Corbin stood at the kitchen counter with the phone against his ear. Cinder was lying near the front door. "Stable?" "Stable enough that I'm willing to use the word." "What does that mean?" "It means stop trying to turn medicine into a yes or no profession." Corbin opened a drawer, found an old notepad, and wrote, "Day 1 stable." He tore off the page and stuck it to the refrigerator with a magnet. Mallory heard the paper. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." That sounded exactly like something. "Goodbye, Mallory. Tell Cinder his girlfriend is stubborn." Corbin ended the call. Cinder had raised his head at Mallory's voice. Corbin looked at him. "She's stable." The dog stood and went to the door. Corbin watched him wait there. For what, neither of them could say. On day 3, Mallory reported that Luma's temperature had returned to normal and the Denver team was pleased with her hydration. Another piece of paper appeared on the refrigerator. Day 3, temperature normal. By day 5, 8 on her own. The notes formed an uneven vertical line beneath a magnet advertising a roofing company Corbin had never called. Cinder began noticing the ritual. The phone rang. Mallory spoke. Corbin wrote something down. Something good existed somewhere beyond the door. Cinder still waited for it to return. At night, Corbin occasionally woke and found the shepherd standing silently in the hallway, not looking at him, listening. Corbin learned not to ask what he had heard. Usually, it was nothing Corbin could detect. Once it was a snowplow 2 roads away. Another time, it was ice dropping from the roof. Cinder would listen until the sound disappeared, then return to his place near the entrance. On the 6th morning, Corbin woke before his alarm and discovered the water bowl half empty. He did not comment. That evening, the food bowl was clean. He did not comment on that either. Some things became harder if they knew they were being watched. The next afternoon, Mallory called while Corbin was removing his duty belt at the kitchen table. Cinder stood before the first ring ended. Corbin noticed. Mallory said, "She stood today." His hands stopped over the buckle. "For how long?" "Briefly. Assisted. Nobody's enrolling her in a marathon." Corbin glanced down. Cinder had come closer. "She stood today," Corbin told him. The shepherd stared at his face. Corbin added, "With help." Cinder stepped forward. Instead of going to the door, he pressed his shoulder against Corbin's knee. Corbin froze. It was not the desperate contact from the clinic after Luma had left. There was less collapse in it. More choice. Cinder stayed there for several seconds. Then he walked to the water bowl and drank. Corbin looked toward the refrigerator. 3 scraps of paper. A dog drinking water. A woman recovering almost 200 miles away. Nothing dramatic had happened. Yet something in the room felt different. Mallory was still on the phone. "You there?" "Yeah." "You sound surprised." "I'm not." "Of course not." Corbin looked down at Cinder. For the first time since bringing him home, the dog was not positioned where he could watch a door. 3 days later, Denver approved a short, supervised visit. Corbin told himself the trip was primarily for Cinder. The dog had earned information better than scraps on a refrigerator. That explanation survived until they were 20 minutes south of Silver Creek and Corbin realized he had been gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Cinder sat in the rear seat wearing the forest green collar Miles had provided. He had tolerated it after inspecting the buckle as if evaluating poor engineering. The landscape changed as they descended from the mountains. Snowbanks thinned. Traffic increased. Cinder watched every vehicle that passed. The veterinary hospital outside Denver was larger than Mallory's clinic. All glass doors, pale walls, polished flooring, and voices deliberately kept low. A rehabilitation nurse brought them into a visitation room. "Let her come to him," she said. "No rough movement. If either dog gets too excited, we separate them." Corbin nodded. Cinder stood beside him. His entire body was rigid. The side door opened. Luma appeared. She looked smaller. That was Corbin's first thought. Her pale honey coat had been cleaned. The cream stripe down her chest was visible now, and a charcoal support sling passed beneath her hindquarters. A technician walked beside her, carrying part of her weight. Luma took one slow step, then another. Cinder did not move. Corbin had expected pulling, barking, some eruption of the same panic he had seen at the clinic. Instead, the shepherd seemed to forget how movement worked. His ears lowered slightly. His head dropped. Luma saw him. Her pace changed. Not faster, more certain. Cinder took one step forward. Stopped. Luma continued until only a few inches separated them. Their noses touched. Neither dog made a sound. Luma smelled his muzzle, then the side of his face, lingering at the small notch in his left ear. Cinder closed his eyes. Then he lowered his head beneath her jaw. Luma rested her muzzle across the top of his head. Corbin looked away for a moment. Not because the sight was too sad, because it wasn't. That surprised him more. He had spent years assuming that if something changed because of pain, the change itself belonged to the pain. Dean had died. Therefore, every memory of the years before Dean died had somehow become part of the same loss. But Luma was standing. Not as she had been. Not without assistance. Not without consequences. Still standing. Cinder was not the same dog who had fought the clinic door. He was learning how close he could come without overwhelming her. And Corbin. Corbin was standing in a room he had never expected to enter, watching 2 animals understand something he had failed to learn from years of explanations. Survival did not restore the past. It created a different future. The visit lasted less than 15 minutes. On the way out, Cinder looked back only once. Corbin noticed that too. The drive home took nearly 3 hours. Cinder slept for most of it. Actually slept. His head rested against the folded blanket on the rear seat, paws loose, body moving gently with the cruiser. Corbin checked the mirror several times. By the 4th, he realized he was doing exactly what Cinder had done to Luma on the first drive. Monitoring breath. Confirming presence. He stopped checking. Mostly. Life at the house changed after Denver. Cinder ate full meals. He slept beside the stove for short periods before returning to the hallway. He explored the bedroom and decided Corbin's shoes deserved a complete investigation. One evening, Corbin came out of the shower and found Cinder carrying one of his old black patrol gloves down the hallway. "Hey!" Cinder stopped. "That's mine." The dog continued toward the living room. Cinder. No urgency whatsoever. Cinder placed the glove beside the blankets near the stove and lay down next to it. Corbin stood with one hand on his hip. "That's evidence tampering." Cinder stared at him. Corbin tried to hold the expression. He failed. The laugh came out quietly at first, then became real enough that he had to look away. The sound felt strange inside the house, too large for rooms accustomed to silence. Cinder's tail struck the floor once. Corbin looked back. "Don't encourage yourself." Miles continued calling every few days. No owner had come forward. No microchip registration had surfaced. No neighboring sheriff's office had a matching report. The county notices remained active. The stray hold continued exactly as required. Corbin never asked how many days remained. He noticed that too. That night, Cinder slept beside the stove with Corbin's stolen glove beneath one paw. The front door was 10 feet away. For the first time, he did not seem concerned about the distance. By the second week, Cinder had stopped treating every walk as a temporary evacuation. He no longer checked Corbin's cruiser before they left the driveway. He no longer turned at every engine on the road. Most mornings, he stepped through the gate with the loose, forward-moving interest of a dog, beginning to believe the route might eventually bring him home again. Corbin noticed the difference without mentioning it. Their walks grew longer. A narrow pedestrian trail ran behind his neighborhood, crossed a shallow creek, and curved toward Silver Creek Community Garden before continuing along the edge of Silver Creek cold storage and produce. In summer, the garden was one of those places Corbin passed without really seeing. Raised beds, tomato cages, retired people arguing about mulch, children carrying watering cans larger than their torsos. Winter stripped it down to structure. The beds became white rectangles. The greenhouse stood under a cap of snow. Bare wooden stakes leaned against wire fencing. Beyond all of it, the cold storage plant occupied the next property like a practical gray fortress. Loading docks faced the service road, rooftop vents pushed pale vapor into the air, and trucks came and went beneath the steady mechanical hum of refrigeration equipment. Cinder showed no interest in the building. At first, he was halfway past the garden fence one afternoon when he stopped so abruptly that Corbin took 2 more steps before the leash tightened. "What?" Cinder lifted his nose. The wind was moving west to east. He smelled the air once, then again. Corbin waited. The shepherd moved toward the fence. There was a narrow strip of snow between the trail and the lowest raised beds. Cinder lowered his nose to it, followed something for several feet, then began digging. Snow flew backward between his legs. "Cinder." No response. "Hey." Corbin shortened the leash. Cinder dug harder. Corbin stepped beside him and gave the harness a firm pull. "That's enough." The shepherd resisted for half a second, then came away. Under the disturbed snow was dark soil. Nothing else. Corbin stared at it. "You dragged me over here for dirt." Cinder looked back at the hole. Compelling investigation. They continued walking. The next afternoon, Cinder went directly to the same place. Corbin saw the change in his body before the digging started. His ears came forward. His stride shortened. His nose worked close to the snow. "Don't." Cinder scraped once. "Cinder." Another scrape. Corbin pulled him away before the hole became more than a shallow depression. On the third visit, Cinder ignored that spot completely. He walked another 20 yards toward the greenhouse and began digging beside a leaning garden stake. That was when Doris Pritchard found them. "You planning to invoice me for excavation?" Corbin turned. The woman coming down the central garden path was small enough that her mustard-yellow winter coat seemed to arrive before the rest of her. White-silver curls escaped beneath a knitted hat, and a burgundy scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She carried a curved wooden walking stick, though Corbin quickly decided it functioned more as punctuation than support. He had seen her around town. Everyone had. Doris Pritchard had helped run the community garden longer than some town employees had worked for Silver Creek. Corbin looked at the growing hole. "I was actually planning to repair it before you saw it. That would have been much better policing." Cinder stopped digging and watched her. Doris stopped several feet away. Unlike most people meeting a large German shepherd, she did not immediately reach for his head. Corbin noticed that. "Your dog," she said, "is trying to relocate my garden. Temporary foster. That's what people say right before buying the expensive food." Corbin gave her a look. Doris pointed her walking stick toward the hole. "Temporary dog. Permanent dirt. I'll fill it." "You said that like a man hoping I'd leave." "I said it like a man holding a shovel in his future." That earned him a small smile. Doris studied Cinder. The dog had already turned his attention back toward the ground. "Something under there?" "Probably mice." "Then he's ambitious. They usually don't apply for building permits." Corbin filled the hole with his boot as best he could and led Cinder away. The problem should have ended there. It did not. Over the next several days, Cinder developed an irritating talent for finding places in the garden where the snow seemed thinner. Not bare. Not dramatically melted. Just wrong by a few inches. One patch near the south fence. Another beside the greenhouse. A third close to a row of dormant berry bushes. Corbin began watching the ground instead of the dog. At first, ordinary explanations came easily. Rodents. A shallow water line. Residual warmth from underground utilities. Sunlight reflecting from the greenhouse wall. The plant next door probably had pipes running everywhere. There were a dozen reasons for warm soil in an old town. There were also a dozen reasons for a German shepherd to dig. Corbin preferred explanations that did not require imagination. So he kept filling the holes. Cinder kept reopening them. On Thursday afternoon, Corbin brought a small folding shovel. Doris saw it immediately. Oh, good. Now you're equipped for your life of crime. I'm repairing property. You're repairing the same property every day. That is unfortunately accurate. She watched while Corbin packed snow and soil back into a shallow hole near the greenhouse. Cinder stood beside him, visibly offended. Doris pointed at the dog. I think he considers you the problem. I'm getting that impression. Cinder moved closer. Corbin reached for the harness. The growl came low and immediate. Corbin stopped. Doris stopped too. The sound was not loud. That made it more noticeable. Corbin slowly removed his hand. Cinder did not bare his teeth. He did not turn fully toward Corbin. His body remained aimed at the disturbed ground. Okay, Corbin said. Cinder looked at him. The expression was different from the clinic, different from the ditch. There, Corbin had seen fear sharpened by protection. This sounded almost miserable, as if being pulled away from that particular patch mattered more than winning an argument. Corbin crouched. Show me what I'm missing. Cinder lowered his nose again. He sniffed the edge of the hole, then pressed one ear briefly toward the ground. Corbin watched him. Nothing mystical happened. No dramatic bark. No hidden object appeared. The dog simply stayed there. Corbin removed one glove. He held his hand a few inches above the disturbed soil. Warmth touched his palm. Faint, but real. He moved his hand toward untouched snow a few feet away. Cold. Back over the hole. Varm. Doris had come closer. You feel that? Yeah. Corbin leaned down without placing his face directly over the opening. There was an odor, weak enough that he could have missed it. Not rotten. Not gasoline. Something mineral. Metallic. Damp. Cinder sniffed again and backed his nose away. Corbin looked toward the cold storage plant. White vapor drifted from rooftop vents. A truck reversed toward a loading dock, its backup alarm sounding faintly across the fence. Everything looked ordinary. That mattered. Corbin had learned over 20 years in police work that ordinary scenes produced extraordinary explanations only rarely. Usually the answer was boring. And boring was good. Could be a utility line, he said. Doris leaned on her stick. Could be. Water. Drainage. Heat transfer from the plant. Could be. Corbin looked at her. You're saying that in a way that suggests a second sentence. I'm 71. Most of my sentences have sequels. He almost smiled. Cinder pressed his ear toward the ground again. Corbin watched longer this time. Then he stood. He did not refill the hole. That evening, he called Silver Creek Public Works from his kitchen. Cinder was asleep near the stove, Corbin's stolen patrol glove still occupying a corner of the blanket as though it had been legally transferred. The Public Works clerk emailed him a current utility overlay for the garden property. Corbin opened it on his laptop. Water line along the west edge. Electrical conduit near the greenhouse. Storm drainage closer to the road. Nothing substantial ran beneath the places Cinder had been digging. He zoomed in. No explanation improved. The next morning, he stopped by the garden before his shift. Doris was already there brushing snow from the greenhouse door. He held up a printed map. Current utilities don't show anything significant near those spots. Doris barely glanced at it. Current. Corbin lowered the paper. What does that mean? It means those maps aren't the whole story. She rested both hands over the curved top of her walking stick. When I was a kid, this wasn't a garden. Town maintenance used the property. Trucks, salt storage, repair sheds. Ugly place. My father hated driving past it. Corbin looked across the snow-covered beds. Public works yard? Something like that. What happened to it? Town moved the operation closer to the highway. Buildings came down. Years later, people wanted a garden. She pointed toward the greenhouse. There were service lines under here. Maybe drains. Maybe heat. I was 12. Children are not known for documenting municipal infrastructure. Any access points? I remember concrete covers, at least 2. Where? Doris looked around slowly. That's the trouble. Everything that mattered when I was 12 is now underneath something somebody built when I was 50. Corbin looked again at the printed map. Old records? Municipal archive, basement of town hall, unless they finally moved it. Who would know? Probably nobody useful. That sounds encouraging. It's local government. Hope responsibly. Cinder had wandered to the edge of the previous day's hole. He did not dig. He stood over it, nose moving slowly. Corbin folded the map. He had no emergency. No evidence of a crime. No reason to call the fire department or shut down a factory because a foster dog disliked 3 patches of soil. And he was not going to manufacture certainty because uncertainty made him uncomfortable. That lesson had cost him enough already. He stepped toward the hole. Cinder looked up. Corbin crouched beside him. The soil remained darker than the surrounding ground. A thin rim of snow had melted during the night, despite the temperature dropping below 20 degrees. Corbin touched the air above it again. Still warm. Still faintly metallic. He looked past the wire fence toward Silver Creek Cold Storage and Produce. Nothing had changed there. Workers crossed a loading platform. A forklift moved behind an open bay. Steam or ordinary winter vapor lifted into the clear morning. Corbin knew better than to turn coincidence into conclusion. He also knew better than to keep erasing a pattern simply because he did not yet understand it. He set the shovel down beside the fence. Cinder watched. Corbin left the hole open. All right. The shepherd's ears shifted toward him. Corbin looked down at the dark patch in the white ground. I'm listening. Silver Creek Cold Storage and Produce had always sounded healthy from the outside. That was one of the tricks of large machinery. As long as the fans turned, forklifts moved, loading doors opened, and trucks kept arriving, a building could appear perfectly functional while smaller systems underneath it argued otherwise. Graham Tully had spent 26 years learning to listen to those arguments. He stood in the maintenance room late Thursday afternoon with one hand resting against a steel cabinet and the other holding his red-handled inspection flashlight. At 59, Graham had the thick forearms and permanent gray mustache of a man who had tightened too many bolts in bad weather to believe equipment ever failed without first trying to complain. A digital gauge changed by 3 points. Settled. Changed again. Graham frowned. Behind him, a younger technician leaned over a tablet. Evan Bellows was 29, tall and narrow through the shoulders, with short brown curls that never completely obeyed his work cap and black rectangular glasses he pushed up whenever he became nervous, which meant he had been pushing them up a lot that week. Same fluctuation? Evan asked. Worse. Evan looked at the tablet. Sense or drift? Maybe. Graham reached past him and tapped another reading. Except sensor drift doesn't warm concrete. They walked out of the maintenance room and into the lower processing corridor. The plant smelled of cold metal, cardboard, wet boots, and the faint, clean bite of refrigeration equipment. Workers in insulated jackets moved between stations beneath bright white lights. Nothing looked wrong. Graham hated that. He stopped beside a floor seam near an old service wall. Hand. Evan crouched and touched the concrete. His eyebrows rose. That's warmer. It was warmer Tuesday. Not this much. Graham straightened. There had been other signs. Condensate levels above normal. A pressure fluctuation in a system old enough that half the labels had been replaced and the other half had become archaeological evidence. A defrost return line marked inactive on the newest plans, but still producing inconsistent readings. None of them alone justified panic. Together, Graham thought they justified respect. He had filed maintenance notes. Twice. Then a third time. The first response had been to recalibrate the sensor. The second had been to schedule an inspection for the following week. The third had generated an email with the phrase, "Monitor for recurrence." Graham disliked that phrase. It sounded responsible while requiring nothing. He found Calvin Rusk near the loading office. Calvin was 50, neatly built, clean-shaven, with salt and pepper hair that remained combed even after 10 hours inside a warehouse. His charcoal management parka was open over a pale blue shirt, and a slim silver mechanical pencil rested in his breast pocket. He was not careless. That was what frustrated Graham most. Careless men were easier to fight. Calvin understood consequences. He simply counted different ones. "I need line 3, paused, Graham said. Calvin looked up from a shipping sheet. "For what?" "Return pressure is moving again. Floor temperature's up along the old chase." "How far up?" "Enough that I'm standing here." "That wasn't my question." Graham gave him the numbers. Calvin's expression tightened, but not in disbelief. He knew the reports. "We had a false sensor event last month. We had one bad sensor last month. And your current reading is still under emergency threshold." Graham leaned a hand on the desk. "We keep calling it nothing because nothing's cheaper." Calvin set the shipping sheet down. "And shutting the plant on a bad reading costs 200 people a shift." Neither man raised his voice. There was no need. A loaded trailer waited outside. Another shipment had already been delayed by road conditions earlier in the week. If they lost the evening window, drivers would sit overnight, product would miss distribution, and people who never saw the plant floor would begin asking expensive questions. Graham understood all of that. Calvin understood that Graham knew it. That was what made the argument difficult. "I'm not asking you to close the building," Graham said. "I'm asking for a partial shutdown while we verify the old return system." Calvin rotated the silver pencil between 2 fingers. "How long?" "If it's nothing, 2 hours. And if it isn't, then you'll be glad we stopped." Calvin looked through the office glass toward the workers moving on the floor. "You've got 3 people out sick." "I know. Maintenance contractor can't get here until morning." "I know. Highway forecast says another freeze tonight." "I also know how weather works, Calvin." A muscle moved in Calvin's jaw. Then he exhaled. "Keep monitoring. If the reading moves again, come back to me." Graham stared at him. Calvin met the look. It was not victory. It was postponement. Those were often mistaken for each other. 2 hours later, the gauge moved again. This time, Evan saw it first. Graham. He did not have to say more. The pressure climbed, dropped, then climbed farther than it had before. A temperature probe near the service floor showed another increase. Graham took the radio from his belt. "Calvin, maintenant." The response came after several seconds. "Go. I want line 3 down. Silence." Then, "How certain are you?" Graham looked at Evan. Evan looked back, "Certain enough that I'm asking twice." Calvin arrived in person. His pencil was gone now. That small detail told Graham he had finally become worried. Calvin examined the readings himself. "What can you verify without shutting the full section?" "Valve bank and sensor junction." "Accessible?" "Yes." "Confined?" "No. Service corridor is approved access." Calvin looked toward the production floor. "Give me a surface verification first." Graham's face hardened. "If that line's moving when it shouldn't be, then you confirm it, and I shut the section." There it was again. A reasonable sentence. That was how most bad decisions arrived. Not as recklessness. As one more request for certainty. Graham picked up his flashlight. Evan collected the gas meter and tablet. 20 minutes, Graham said. Calvin nodded. "Call the second something looks wrong." Graham gave him a dry look. "Something already looks wrong." They took the service stairs down. Before the lower door closed, Evan pulled out his phone. He sent a message to a coworker upstairs. Going below with Graham. Old return line acting weird. He hesitated. Then added, "Shouldn't take long." Graham noticed. "Girlfriend?" "No." "Then your generation documents maintenance more personally than mine." Evan pocketed the phone. "My generation likes witnesses." Graham almost smiled. The corridor beneath the plant was narrow but legal for routine access, built decades earlier when the property extended farther toward what was now the community garden. Concrete walls, old pipe racks, replacement cables mounted beside dead ones nobody had bothered removing. Water moved in a shallow channel along one edge. Their boots echoed. Evan checked the meter. "Airs normal. Good." They continued. Near the valve bank, Graham stopped. A thin stream of warm water ran from a seam behind an old bracket. "That wasn't here Tuesday." Evan raised the flashlight. The metal support above it had orange corrosion along one edge. Graham touched nothing. Back up, Affondit. A low sound moved through the corridor. Not a bang, more like metal shifting its weight. Both men went still. Did you hear? Yes. The sound came again. Somewhere behind them. Graham turned. Dust slipped from a concrete joint. Move. They had taken only a few steps when the floor trembled. A section of old support framing gave way behind them with a heavy grinding sound. Concrete fragments dropped across the route they had just used. A pipe rack twisted downward, blocking most of the passage. The lights went out. Emergency fixtures came on seconds later, dim and yellow. Evan breathed once. Graham? I'm here. A second shift in the structure answered from farther down the corridor. Graham raised the radio. Maintenance to floor. Static. He tried again. Nothing useful came back. Evan checked his phone. No service. The younger man looked toward the blocked corridor. That's our way out. For now. Graham swept the flashlight across the damage. No flame. No dramatic rupture. Just old material that had been taking small insults for years and had finally stopped forgiving them. Don't climb it, Graham said. I wasn't. You were thinking about it. Evan pushed his glasses up. Maybe. Quit. Above them, somewhere beyond concrete and steel, the plant continued running. For the moment, across Silver Creek, Corbin Hale was standing at his kitchen sink when the lights flickered. Once, then again. The wood stove continued glowing beside the living room wall. Cinder's head came up. Corbin looked toward the ceiling. Probably the grid. Cinder stood. The shepherd crossed the room quickly, passing the front door without looking at it. That alone made Corbin pay attention. Cinder went to the back door. His body stiffened. Then he barked. Corbin set down the coffee mug in his hand. Cinder. The dog did not turn. Another bark. Not toward Corbin. Toward the north side of the house. Toward the trail. The community garden. Corbin walked closer. Cinder looked at him once. Then at the door again. 2 weeks earlier, Corbin would have told him no. 3 days earlier, he might have assumed an animal had crossed the yard. Now there were 3 open patches in the garden. Warm soil, incomplete maps, and a dog that had been right often enough to deserve observation. Corbin pulled on his slate-blue field jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and clipped the long line to Cinder's harness. Show me. The dog went out fast. Not uncontrolled. Purposeful. They crossed the yard, followed the snow-covered trail, and reached the community garden in minutes. The cold storage plant still had lights, but not all of them. Several lower windows had gone dark. Cinder did not look toward the building. He went directly to one of the places he had dug before. The open patch Corbin had refused to refill. The shepherd lowered his nose. Warm air touched the fur around his muzzle. He scraped through 2 inches of loose soil. Stopped. Then pressed one ear toward the ground. Corbin listened. Nothing. Cinder barked 3 times. Sharp. Evenly spaced. Cinder. The dog remained still. Corbin crouched. At first there was only wind pushing against the greenhouse plastic. Then, tap, tap, tap. Corbin's face changed. He moved closer to the exposed strip of old metal beneath the soil. 3 more taps. Deliberate. Not pipes settling. Not water moving. Corbin put his gloved hand against the metal. The vibration reached his palm. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch. 214. Go ahead, 214. Possible trapped persons or utility incident. Community garden adjacent to Silver Creek cold storage. I have pattern tapping coming through an underground metal structure. A pause. Copy. Any visible hazard? Unknown. Warm airflow at surface. No entry attempted. Start fire and EMS. Notify the plant. Copy. Corbin did not dig deeper. He did not open anything. He moved Cinder several feet back and marked the location with his flashlight laid sideways in the snow. Within minutes, the first emergency lights appeared through the trees. A woman from the cold storage plant came running through the gate before anyone could stop her, winter coat half fastened and a phone in one hand. Officer. Corbin stood. Stay there. She stopped. 2 firefighters approached from behind him. The woman held up the phone. Graham Tully and Evan Bellows went down to check the old return system. Nobody can reach them. Corbin looked at the screen she was offering. The last visible message read, "Going below with Graham. Old return line acting weird." Cinder lowered himself beside the marked patch of ground. His ears remained forward. Everyone went quiet. From beneath the frozen garden came another sequence. Tap, dap, dap. This time, nobody called it a pipe. By the time the third emergency vehicle reached the community garden, the place no longer looked like public property. Yellow tape crossed the walking path. Portable lights threw hard white circles across the snow. A fire engine blocked the service road while an ambulance backed into a position facing out, ready to leave without turning around. Corbin stood beside the garden gate with his radio in one hand and Cinder's long line looped around the other. 2 confirmed missing, he told the arriving crews. Graham Tully, 59. Evan Bellows, 29. Both entered an approved service corridor from inside the plant. Last contact was less than an hour ago. A firefighter repeated the names back. Corbin nodded. Pattern tapping confirmed beneath this section of the garden. No surface entry attempted. That last sentence mattered. Corbin heard himself say it and knew exactly why. Captain Silas Boone arrived with the County Confined Space Rescue Unit several minutes later. He was shorter than Corbin expected, compact through the shoulders, silver hair cut close beneath a white and red command helmet. He did not project urgency by moving faster than everyone else. He projected it by wasting nothing. "Who has scene command?" "Fire until you arrived," Corbin said. "Police have perimeter and missing person timeline." Silas nodded once. "Good. Keep it that way. No ceremony. No debate about who mattered most." That steadied Corbin. A second county vehicle pulled in behind the rescue truck. Leah Montrose stepped out carrying a hard equipment case and an orange waterproof notebook tucked beneath one arm. She wore a dark green response jacket, black insulated field pants, and the expression of someone who had no interest in theories before numbers. "Show me every surface point you've noticed," she said. Corbin looked down at Cinder. 3 from earlier this week, 1 active tonight. Leah followed him through the garden. Cinder moved on the long line, not searching as much as revisiting. At the first disturbed patch, he sniffed once and moved on. At the second, he paused longer. Leah placed a probe close to the ground and watched the readings. Air movement, mild temperature difference. She marked the spot. At the third, near the old fence, Cinder's posture changed. He slowed. His nose lifted. Then he backed away from a corroded metal cover partly hidden beneath snow. Not dramatically. He lowered his body, pulled against the line, and made a low, uneasy sound. One of the younger firefighters stepped forward with a pry bar. Silas raised a gloved hand. "Hold." The firefighter stopped. Leah crouched several feet from the cover and extended the probe toward the narrow gap at its edge. The detector changed. Not wildly. Enough. Leah waited for the reading to stabilize. "Not this one." The firefighter lowered the pry bar. Corbin watched Cinder. Nobody said the dog had sensed danger. Nobody needed to. Cinder had noticed something different. Leah had measured it. That was enough. Silas looked toward Corbin. "What else do we have besides current utility maps?" Doris Pritchard remembers older service structures. "Where is she?" Corbin pointed beyond the second line of tape. Doris stood under a borrowed emergency blanket, mustard yellow coat visible beneath it, her walking stick planted firmly in the snow as if someone might try to remove her by force. Silas followed Corbin's gaze. "She useful?" "More than the new map so far." "Bring her." Doris came through the perimeter with the grave satisfaction of someone whose complaints about municipal record-keeping had finally received institutional recognition. Leah spread the current utility overlay across the hood of a county truck. Doris looked at it for approximately 3 seconds. "That's wrong." Leah glanced up. "Incomplete or wrong?" "Both, if the town was feeling ambitious." Corbin almost smiled. Public Works had begun searching archived property records. 10 minutes later, a dispatcher sent a scanned image from an old municipal plan dated 38 years earlier. Leah opened it on a tablet. The faded drawing showed the former maintenance lot, several structures no longer standing, and a narrow utility chase extending beneath what was now the garden. Doris leaned closer. "There." Her finger hovered above the screen. "That used to run behind the repair shed." Silas studied the map. "Any access?" "One near the old equipment pad. Maybe another by the south wall. Maybe doesn't get opened. Leah nodded. We verify first. They found the first likely access beneath packed snow near the garden's service edge. Meters came out. Ventilation equipment followed. Nobody hurried the opening just because men might be waiting beneath it. That was the hardest part for Corbin to watch. The rescue team moved quickly, but each action required the next action to be earned. Atmosphere. Structure. Anchor points. Communication. Backup. Corbin understood every reason. Understanding did not make waiting easier. Cinder sat beside him. The shepherd's ears turned toward every mechanical sound from beneath the ground. When the access was finally opened and cleared for entry, 2 trained rescuers descended. Silas remained at the surface. Radio traffic replaced the tapping. 10 feet. Air stable. A pause. 25. Water on floor. Passage intact. Corbin stood near the perimeter, repeating updates to police dispatch and keeping civilians back from the garden. He confirmed the plant employee list again, checked Evan's last message time, sent an officer to preserve the maintenance room logs, redirected a second ambulance when its driver tried to approach from the wrong road. Work gave his hands somewhere to be. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Then the radio snapped alive. Contact with Victim 1. Every conversation around the command area stopped. Silas keyed his mic. Condition? Adult male conscious. Identifies as Graham Tully. Lower leg pinned by light structural debris. Airway clear. Responsive. Corbin exhaled. He had not realized he was holding his breath. Cinder stood. The dog looked toward the access point, but did not pull. Another stretch of waiting followed. Then movement. A litter emerged from the opening. Graham Tully appeared beneath layered blankets, face pale with cold and exhaustion, gray mustache wet from melted snow and condensation. EMS took him immediately. Corbin stayed near enough to hear, but far enough not to interfere. Graham caught sight of the uniform. Sergeant. Corbin stepped closer. You're out. Graham shook his head. Effin. We know. No. Graham grabbed Corbin's sleeve with a gloved hand. Farther in. Collapse between us. He was answering before they moved me. An EMT gently guided Graham's hand back beneath the blanket. We've got him, Corbin said. Graham looked at him hard. Make sure. The stretcher moved away. Silas was already listening to the rescue team. The report came quickly. The route beyond Graham's position was partially blocked. Too unstable to continue through safely. They needed another access. Corbin looked at Cinder. This time the shepherd did not need encouragement. They moved along the garden perimeter under Leah's direction. Cinder passed 2 previous digging spots. Near an old tool shed, he stopped. No digging. He simply raised his nose and stood still. Corbin gave him slack. Cinder shifted 3 feet toward a stack of frozen compost bins. Doris stared. Oh, everyone looked at her. She pointed with her walking stick. There used to be concrete behind that shed. Leah turned. An access? I thought it was a drain. Big round cover. We stacked bins over it years ago because nobody could open the thing anyway. Silas looked at Leah. Verify. The bins were moved carefully. Beneath packed snow and old leaves sat a broad concrete cap. Leah checked the surrounding air. Then the old plan. The lines matched. This may connect beyond the collapse. Silas began issuing instructions. Corbin stood a few yards away as the second access operation started. Then a voice came over the rescue radio. Weak through static. Victim 2 responding. Evan Bellows conscious. Limited verbal response. Snow moved through the portable lights. The radio crackled again. A man beyond reach. A voice from somewhere Corbin could not see. The garden disappeared. For half a heartbeat, he was back beside the tanker 6 years earlier. Dean's cruiser beyond the exclusion line. A radio in Corbin's hand. Wait. Hold position. Do not approach. His thumb touched the edge of the black watch beneath his glove. Corbin stepped forward, past one marker, then another. Silas turned. Sergeant. Corbin stopped. I can help. Silas looked at him, not accusing, not sympathetic. You can help up here. I've worked vehicle extrications. I can... You're not confined. Space-trained. Corbin's jaw tightened. There's a man down there. I know. Silas stepped closer. His voice remained low. You go underground without training. I don't gain a rescuer. I gain another man I have to bring back. Anger flashed through Corbin. Fast. Hot. Because Silas had reduced 6 years of guilt to one practical sentence. And because the sentence was correct. Cinder came beside Corbin. The shepherd pressed his shoulder against Corbin's leg. Not toward the opening. Not away from it. Just there. Corbin looked down. The first day they met, Cinder had not carried Luma out of the ditch. He had not treated her injuries. He had not driven the cruiser. He had done the one thing he could do. He had stayed long enough for someone else to continue. Corbin looked back at Silas. Understood. Silas waited. Corbin knew why. He had spent too many years hiding behind implied agreement. I stay topside. Silas nodded. Good. I need the ambulance lane clear and every plant employee accounted for. Corbin turned away from the access. It hurt more than stepping toward it had. That was how he knew the decision mattered. He went back to work. A delivery truck appeared at the wrong entrance. Corbin rerouted it. He confirmed the second ambulance position. He passed Evans' identifying information to EMS. He coordinated with another officer collecting worker statements. He kept the garden clear when curious residents began gathering beyond the tape. Below them, the rescue team worked. Minutes became long enough to lose shape. Then, Silas's radio came alive. Victim 2 free. Preparing extraction. Nobody cheered. Not yet. Corbin had learned that much. The litter rose slowly through the second access. First, rescue helmets. Then gloved hands. Then Evan. He looked younger than Corbin remembered from the employee photo, glasses gone, face tired beneath an oxygen mask. EMS moved forward. Cinder stood beside Corbin. As the litter passed, one of Evan's hands shifted out from beneath the blanket. Cinder took 2 careful steps. Corbin almost stopped him. Then Evan's fingers moved. One touched the fur between Cinder's ears. Barely. A second at most. Cinder stayed perfectly still. Then the stretcher continued toward the ambulance. Corbin watched the doors close. The vehicle pulled away under flashing lights, turning onto the cleared road toward Silver Creek. Dean Foster was still gone. Nothing about tonight changed that. Nothing could. But Corbin stood above frozen ground where another man had been beyond reach. And this time, staying where he belonged had helped bring that man home. The investigation did not uncover a conspiracy. That almost made the truth harder to accept. There had been no secret room where someone had decided that safety no longer mattered. No forged document. No dramatic order to ignore a known disaster. There had been emails, maintenance notes, a delayed inspection, a sensor that had once been wrong, a shipment nobody wanted to lose. A line item moved from this week to next. Each decision, viewed alone, was ordinary enough to defend. Together, they formed a path nobody had intended to walk. Silver Creek Cold Storage and Produce shut down the affected section while county safety officials and state inspectors reviewed the old utility system. Calvin Rusk remained employed during the investigation, though no longer in control of decisions involving the damaged area. Corbin saw him once outside the plant. Calvin stood near the loading office in a charcoal parka, staring at the temporary fencing around the closed section. He looked older than he had 3 weeks earlier. Corbin did not approach him. There was nothing useful to say. Calvin had not wanted Graham Tully or Evan Bellows trapped underground. That did not erase the fact that he had repeatedly treated uncertainty as permission to continue. Consequences did not require hatred. Sometimes they only required a record. The garden was surveyed next. Leah Montrose and Public Works marked the places Cinder had dug. Most sat near old utility seams, heat transfer points, deteriorated structures, or narrow gaps where air from below could move toward the surface. There was no single dramatic discovery waiting beneath them. Cinder had never known what the lines were. He had never understood the plant. He had simply noticed that the ground smelled different, felt different, sounded different. Humans had needed maps, instruments, records, and eventually an emergency before they believed the pattern. Corbin thought about that more than he wanted to. Not because he believed dogs were wiser than people, because people were very good at explaining away things they did not have time to understand. Miles Danner called him on a Tuesday morning. Corbin was making coffee before shift when his phone vibrated across the counter. Cinder, asleep near the stove, opened one eye. "You're getting lazy," Corbin told him. "Used to stand up before the first ring." Cinder closed the eye again. Miles said. Stray hold cleared. Corbin stopped stirring his coffee. Both? Both. No owner? None that survived verification. We checked the county reports, neighboring counties, rescues, social posts, shelters, nothing credible. Corbin looked toward the refrigerator. Most of the old notes about Luma were still there. Stable. Temperature normal. Ate on her own. Stood with assistance. He had never taken them down. Miles continued, They're eligible for adoption. Corbin did not answer immediately. Miles, to his credit, did not fill the silence. Finally, Corbin said, Luma's still in Denver, which is why I'm not dropping paperwork at your door. I want her back first. That's what I figured. Miles paused. You know you can adopt Cinder separately. Corbin looked down. Cinder had opened both eyes now. No. Miles waited. Corbin added, Not separately. Understood. He ended the call without asking Corbin what the decision would be. That was one of the reasons Corbin liked him. Almost 4 weeks after the afternoon on County Route 14, Luma came back to Silver Creek. The morning was clear and bright. The kind of late winter day when sunlight softened the edges of everything, even though the air remained cold enough to sting. Corbin stood outside Mallory Reese's clinic with Cinder beside him. The shepherd wore his forest green collar and black walking harness. He had been calm all morning. Now he trembled. Not enough for anyone else to notice immediately. Corbin felt it through the leash. Yes. Cinder did not look at him. The transport vehicle pulled into the lot. Mallory came outside in teal scrubs beneath a rust-brown winter coat. Miles stood near the clinic entrance holding a thin folder. Nobody made an event out of the arrival. Corbin appreciated that too. The rear door opened. A rehabilitation technician stepped down first. Then Luma appeared. Her coat had filled out enough that the pale honey along her chest looked almost golden in the sun. A charcoal support sling rested under her hindquarters. She placed one front paw on the ramp. Stopped. Cinder leaned forward. The leash tightened slightly. Corbin did not correct him. Luma took another step. Cinder's body remained tense, but he did not pull. That was new. On the night Luma had left the clinic, he had fought every inch of separation. Now he waited while she covered the distance herself. One step. Pause. Another. Mallory glanced toward Corbin. He knew she had noticed it too. Luma reached the pavement. Cinder lowered his head. She came toward him slowly. When they were close enough, their noses touched. Cinder closed his eyes. Luma smelled along his muzzle, then rested her chin across the top of his head. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mallory said quietly, That's probably the most patient he's ever been. Corbin looked at Cinder. He's had practice. Luma shifted her weight. Cinder moved immediately, but instead of crowding her, he stepped to the side that gave her more room. That small movement caught Corbin harder than the reunion itself. He had spent years thinking love was proven by how quickly a person crossed a distance. Cinder had learned something different. Sometimes love was giving someone enough space to make the distance on their own. Mallory turned toward Corbin. So what happens now? Miles lifted the folder slightly. Corbin looked at him, then at the dogs. There had been a time when the answer would have frightened him because it sounded too much like permanence. 2 dogs meant 2 food bowls, veterinary bills, medication, walks before early shifts, mud on the floor, hair on furniture, planning around living creatures who would notice when he came home late, and one day, inevitably, loss. That last part had always been there. Corbin understood now that avoiding attachment had never removed loss from his life. It had only removed everything that came before it. He held out his hand. Miles gave him the folder. Corbin read every page. Of course he did. Mallory leaned toward Cinder. He's going to read the warranty section. There isn't one, Miles said. Then this could take hours. Corbin ignored both of them. Finally, he signed. Once for Cinder, once for Luma. Miles collected the papers. That's it. Corbin looked down at the 2 shepherds. That seems administratively underwhelming. Most important things are. Corbin rested one hand lightly against Luma's shoulder. They come home. The words felt different from one night. A few weeks later, Corbin sat in a folding chair in the basement meeting room of a county building 20 miles away. No uniform, gray sweater, dark jeans, black watch. 6 other first responders sat in a loose circle with paper cups of coffee. The first meeting, Corbin said almost nothing. The second, he answered 2 questions and immediately regretted both. At the third, another officer talked about a call that had gone wrong years earlier. Not the details. The part afterward. The endless private trial where every choice was retried with information nobody had possessed at the time. Corbin stared at his hands. Then said, "Dean Foster." The room remained still. Nobody rushed him. That helped. His name was Dean Foster. He told them about the tanker, the damaged cruiser, the leaking fuel, the radio, the order to hold position. He did not make himself heroic. He did not make himself a coward. For the first time he told the story without putting either word at the end. When he finished, someone across the circle asked gently, "What do you wish you knew?" Corbin considered it. "For 6 years?" He looked at his watch. "Whether I could have gotten him out." And now? Corbin thought about a frozen garden. Silas Boone telling him exactly where he was useful. Cinder standing beside him instead of pulling toward the opening. Evan Bellows coming back above ground. "I still want to know." He paused. "I just don't think knowing is the price of continuing anymore." No one gave him an answer. For once, the absence of one did not feel like punishment. By early spring, the community garden reopened. The town installed a permanent utility map near the entrance. Old access structures were clearly marked. The raised beds damaged during the rescue were rebuilt. Doris Pritchard supervised everything, as if Silver Creek had finally recognized her rightful authority. Workers from the cold storage plant volunteered too. Graham came one Saturday with a cane and stayed mostly seated while giving instructions nobody had requested. Evan arrived later, walking carefully but without help, and spent 20 minutes arguing with Doris about whether a raised bed was level. She won. Near the far corner of the garden, safely away from every utility line, Silas and several firefighters installed a wide wooden box filled with sand. A painted sign stood above it. "Cinder, Unofficial Safety Inspector. Die here." Corbin stopped in front of it. "You people are encouraging him." Doris folded her arms. "Better municipal planning." Cinder immediately climbed into the box. Corbin sighed. Luma sat beside him, burgundy collar bright against her cream-colored chest. Her right hind leg was still slightly guarded. Probably would be for a while. That afternoon, Corbin took both dogs along the trail beyond town. Snow had begun pulling away from the ditches, exposing brown grass and dark earth beneath. Luma walked on his left. Cinder ranged ahead on the long line. At the bend where the road disappeared between pines, Cinder stopped and looked back. Corbin did not call him. Luma was moving more slowly. So Corbin slowed too. They reached Cinder together. The male shepherd touched his nose to Corbin's hand, then turned and brushed it gently against Luma's cheek. They continued. Nothing had returned to the way it had been. Dean was still gone. Luma still carried winter in her stride. Cinder still woke at unfamiliar noises. Corbin still sometimes reached for the edge of his watch when a radio call lasted too long. But his house now held 2 beds beside the stove. 3 sets of tracks crossed the yard after fresh snow. A black patrol glove disappeared often enough that Corbin had stopped pretending it was accidental. 6 years earlier, he had believed loyalty was measured by how far a person was willing to run into danger. Cinder had given him another measure. Stay beside the one who is hurt. Call for the help you cannot provide. Trust the people whose job begins where yours ends. And when someone you love has to cross the remaining distance themselves, do not mistake waiting for abandonment. Corbin shortened his stride to match Luma's. Cinder adjusted his pace without being asked. Together, they followed the road home. Some losses never give us the answer we wanted. Corbin could not change what happened to Dean, just as Cinder could not erase Luma's pain. What changed was the way they carried what remained. They learned that love is not always rushing into danger. Sometimes it is staying close, asking for help, trusting the right hands, and slowing your steps so someone else can keep moving beside you. Maybe there is something in your own life you still wish you could go back and change. Peace may not come from finally solving the past. Sometimes it begins when we stop demanding an answer from yesterday and choose to care faithfully for what God has placed in front of us today. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories like this. May you find peace for what you cannot change, and courage for what is still yours to carry.